This is chapter 1 from my novel, Stephen Dearsley's Summer of Love. And I won't introduce it, I shall just begin it. In the summer of 1967, 3 naked young men took a shower in a fountain in the centre of Brighton. It was hot and good-humoured mischief. It was hot and good-humoured mischief was in the air. The bus that circled the dolphin-ornamented fountain gave its passengers an uncensored view of the fun. Hilarity competed with outrage. All eyes focused in unison on the same, usually hidden, body parts. Almost oblivious to the drama, but not quite, one young man was intent on other matters. He was still rolling his ticket into a perfect cylinder as he got up from his seat at the front of the top deck. He was on his way to the library. Stephen Dearsley, no older than the fountain invaders, had a better excuse for public nudity than the frolicking, loose-limbed bodies that were dancing in the water. Grey nylon socks stuck to his swelling feet that he refused to let escape from his tightly laced black shoes. Cavalry twill trousers, old-fashioned by a generation, a woolen maroon shirt, and a thick brown corduroy jacket. This was his usual look, and he wouldn't change it just because of the weather. His outfit contrasted vividly with the disposable summer chic all around him, and in the case of those young naked lads, clothes, chic or unchic, had been discarded altogether. The tightly knotted brown tie was his final and most aggressively unseasonable fashion statement. Stephen disliked the whole idea of summer clothing. He disapproved of seasonal sartorial changes just as much as he hated the idea of fashion itself. Clothes were clothes, that's all. A human uniform distinguishing us from other mammals. Uncomfortably hot, he hurried on his way, shy, confused, and disorientated. The dark green and yellow wall tiles and faded grey marble floor of the library's entrance hall felt better to him than any cooling shower. He felt safe with both sun and noise locked out as he climbed the ironclad staircase to the reference library, his sweat turning refreshingly cold on his back. The 19th century building that now housed the public library, art gallery, and reference library was Stephen's daily destination. Originally serving some frivolous function concerning the Prince of Wales's horses, it had now settled into dignified municipal respectability. No mop could bring a shine to its faded splendour, but that made it all the more attractive to Stephen, who delighted in the quiet, understated values of decay. This was his natural habitat. Maybe that was not altogether true. There was just one minor problem here: people. Of the 3 departments, the public library was just much too busy, and the art gallery was even worse now that it had become fashionable with exhibitions designed for art students and the much too fashion-conscious elite of Brighton's bright new intelligentsia. Both departments, on occasion, and to Stephen's irritation, attracted people in from the street. Not silent, unassuming loners like Stephen, who respected this mausoleum, but people just like the ones he had escaped from out there in the sunshine, lively, laughing, happy folk looking for fun. No, for Stephen, his search for the perfect environment had driven him up the staircase to the reference library. Antique books, encyclopedias, gazetteers, and brown box files full of yellowing newspapers were crammed onto shelves reaching up to the ceiling. Porcelain-shaded lamps hung from unpolished chains, their off-white bowls dimmed by the dark shadows of fossilized insects. Beneath them, filling the room, were long oak tables, book-laden and solid, attended by wooden chairs with well-worn maroon leather upholstery. Stephen was by far the youngest of the regular visitors to this, his sanctuary. Dusty amateur academics, probably retired schoolmasters, came here to research books that they had never had time to write during their working lives. They planned to record the minutiae of a way of life that was already dying around them by reading the complete works of forgotten Edwardian poets and searching through back numbers of local publications long out of date. Elderly people came here for somewhere to sit, to read the newspapers without having to buy them, and for an excuse to leave their musty bed-sitting rooms. It was a favourite place for respectable vagrants. The reference library preserved fading ideals, battered pride, and precariously held self-esteem. No one spoke here, so illusions flourished in the silence. Stephen had an unformulated affection for these familiar people. He was 24, of medium height, medium build, pale, with black-rimmed glasses and well-clipped, thick and strikingly dark hair. Unbeknown to himself, he possessed natural good looks, what his elderly relations would call bone structure, and, superficially at least, he was more than a little like Buddy Holly, even if he had never heard of that dead American singer. The product of a rather incompetent private school, he had flunked his exams so badly that his university ambitions had been thwarted, and he had lost the little confidence that he had possessed as a child. He suffered from malaise, or so one of his teachers told him, and he would never come to anything unless he took himself in hand. A long list of educational failures had depressed him, but he still retained the ambition that had haunted him since he was very young. He wanted to be a writer, but not of poetry or fiction. He had no faith in his own imagination. No, he wanted to be a biographer, a chronicler of other people's lives, a dispassionate observer. He was a quietly spoken, often silent student of history. He took a job as a waiter after school, but he had no social skills, and soon he was out of work, invisible to all but his parents, who decided to throw money at the problem. So he moved to Brighton from his childhood village in Kent, and for 3 years now he had been coming to the reference library, where he continued his education in isolated dedication, surviving on a small allowance from his bewildered and disappointed parents. Stephen had found, or so he had decided, his perfect environment, his temple of fustian delights. Sitting in his usual position at one end of a long table, with the summer light barely filtering through the large dusty window at his side, unusually for him, his concentration wavered. Remembering the fun in the fountain, fleetingly and disconcertingly, he felt alone as he thumbed through a book about the metaphysical poets, his current self-imposed project. He had seen those young men, naked and free, and had been left with a mild sense of disappointment that he could never have done anything so recklessly exciting. Those thoughts distracted him from the metaphysical poets. He admired their clever play with words, but love poems weren't really his sort of thing, and literary studies discussing sensuality were even worse. He tried to imagine the professor who had written this book and whose photograph was reproduced on the inside cover. The egg-shaped head of a late middle-aged intellectual frowned through the cellophane book wrapping. John Donne, who wasn't unduly coy about sex, was the professor's favourite. The poet wrote that love, without its sexual consummation, meant that a great prince in prison lies. That was enough about an old academic's sexual fantasies, Stephen thought, suddenly unable to carry on reading dispassionately. There the professor was dancing in the fountain before Stephen could jettison the image. It would not do to imagine professors any more. Let imprisoned princes lie, he thought. Yes, they should lie well buried and forgotten under the academic tweeds of men who were old enough to know better. The silence was broken by a wheezing cough from an old man sitting nearby. He met Stephen's stare with a frown. The library was unusually full today, and as he watched his familiar but never spoken to companions, he began, for the first time, to think of them as living bodies. Human flesh was haunting him today, and now the professor's hidden prints and the old man's cough alerted him to other noises and smells everywhere around him. The sucking of false teeth, stomach rumblings, the shuffling of feet, and the smell of mothballs, paraffin, and pipe tobacco. A whiff of sweet perfume accompanied the assistant librarian as she walked apologetically down the line of tables with a pile of books. She was in her early 30s, or maybe late 20s, he assumed. Her pale, make-up-free face was a full moon dominated by black-framed spectacles, rather like his own pair. He noticed as she worked next to him that her thick dark hair, pulled back into a ponytail, had a light coating of scurf. She was small-boned and skinny-limbed, so that anyone looking at her was drawn to her magnificent and well-supported breasts. Stephen caught her eye accidentally, and she blushed and turned away. A secret princess was imprisoned there, he thought, as the blood rushed to his face. The next chapter, The Metaphysical Poets and the Church, interested him even less than the one about sex. He pushed his fingers through his hair and scratched his scalp. Stretching his legs under the table, he was trying to repress his boredom, just as the door opened, and a young man and woman, the same age as himself, centuries younger than everyone else, shuffled into the room, arms entwined. They were already one body, as the Elizabethan Church would say, identical long hair, sun-browned skin, flowing cheesecloth shirts and faded jeans. They looked irrepressibly happy. Giggling at the silence and the hostile looks, they floated to Stephen's table at the back of the room, still clasped to each other. The assistant librarian tried to ignore them while she stacked books fussily onto shelves. "Have you got any Dürer?" the man asked. "Right next to you in the art section," she replied curtly. "Cool," said the girl, starting to pull out large art books in the limp, unfocused way and stacking them onto the table. "Fantastic! Amazing! Unreal!" Admiring adjectives hurtled around the room with enthusiastic sibilance. When the couple reached Dürer's Head of the Dead Christ, a projected male whisper filled the room. "There it is! It's fantastic! Look! He's tripping, man! Brilliant!" The assistant librarian hissed through her teeth and approached them, but her eyes settled on Christ's head with its brutal crown of thorns, its vacant eyes, and ecstatically opened mouth. Stephen looked too. Until then, he had only seen the suffering. "Look, you'll have to leave if you keep making such a lot of noise," the librarian said harshly, her eyes still focused on the dead Christ. "People are trying to read." "Okay, man, keep cool, okay, we're going, all right," said the young man. "Yes," said the girl, "we love your books, that's all." So they left, slightly sunken now from their bouncy selves, but once more wrapped up in each other and already oblivious to the others. As they slipped from the room, raised eyebrows and sighs accompanied them on their way. Stephen stuffed his papers into his briefcase and hurried out, catching up with them on the stairs, but not knowing why he was there. "Hello," he said. "Hi," they replied. There was a pause whilst they all smiled. They stood there for a lingering moment, not quite embarrassed, but silenced. "See you around," said the man. "Yes," said Stephen, "that would be good." Then they had gone, leaving him stumbling out into the sunshine. He felt foolish, but also inspired by such an uncharacteristic surrender to his subconscious. He was still not sure, though, why he had followed the couple out of the building. He would go home, of course. He could think of nothing else to do now that he'd left the library. But something had changed in him, and today he would do things differently. Instead of going straight to the bus stop, he walked across the green and back towards that fountain. People, his generation were lying in the sun, and a radio was playing a song about love. Nothing new there, he thought, but as he walked on, he inhaled the change. It wasn't just all that exposed flesh or the evocative smell of French cigarettes or whatever people were smoking. And it wasn't even the electric guitar cutting through the airwaves. It was a small, gentle sound that got to him and brought more of his hidden emotion to the surface. Somewhere, in the distance, he heard the tiny tinkling of bells. Again, for the second time that day, he did something without thinking about it. He unfastened his collar and slipped off his thin, brown, knitted tie. Thank you. And that's chapter 1 of Stephen Dearsley's Summer of Love. Thank you.